"Now, my dear good child," said the fairy, "here you have a coach and horses, much handsomer than your sister's, to say the least of them. But as we have neither a postilion nor a coachman to take care of them, run quickly to the stable where the rat-trap is placed, and bring it to me."
Cinderella was full of joy, and did not lose a moment, and soon returned with the trap, in which there were two fine large rats. These too were touched with the wand, and immediately the one was changed into a smart postilion, and the other into a jolly-looking coachman in full finery. Her godmother then said,
"My dear Cinderella, you must go to the garden again before I can complete your equipage. When you get there, keep to the right side, and close to the wall you will see the watering-pot standing. Look behind it, and there you will find 6 lizards, which you must bring to me immediately."
Cinderella hastened to the garden as she was desired, and found the 6 lizards, which she put into her apron and brought to the fairy. Another touch of the wonderful wand soon converted them into 6 spruce footmen in dashing liveries, with powdered hair and pigtails, 3-cornered cocked hats, and gold-headed canes, who immediately jumped up behind the carriage as nimbly as if they had been footmen and nothing else all their lives. The coachman and postilion having likewise taken their places, the fairy said to Cinderella,
"Well, my dear girl, is not this as fine an equipage as you could desire to go to the ball with? Tell me now, are you pleased with it?"
"Oh, yes, dear godmother," replied Cinderella, and then with a good deal of hesitation added, "But how can I make my appearance among so many finely dressed people in these mean-looking clothes?"
"Give yourself no uneasiness about that, my dear. The most laborious part of our task is already accomplished, and it will be hard if I cannot make your dress correspond with your coach and servants."
On saying this, the old woman, assuming her character of Queen of the Fairies, touched Cinderella with the magic wand, and her clothes were instantly changed into a most magnificent ball dress, ornamented with the most costly jewels. The fairy took from her pocket a beautiful pair of elastic glass slippers, which she caused Cinderella to put on, and then desired her to get into the carriage with all expedition, as the ball had already commenced. 2 footmen opened the carriage door, and assisted the now beautifully dressed Cinderella into it. Her godmother, before she took leave, strictly charged her, on no account whatever, to stay at the ball after the clock had struck 12, and then added that if she stopped but a single moment beyond that time, her fine coach, horses, coachman, postilion, and footmen, and fine apparel, would all return to their original shapes of pumpkin, mice, rats, lizards, and mean-looking clothes. Cinderella promised faithfully to attend to everything that the fairy had mentioned, and then, quite overjoyed, gave the direction to the footman, who bawled out in a loud and commanding tone to the coachman, "To the royal palace!" The coachman touched his prancing horses lightly with his whip, and swiftly the carriage started off, and in a short time reached the palace. The arrival of so splendid an equipage as Cinderella's could not fail to attract general notice at the palace gates, and as it drove up to the marble portico, the servants in great numbers came out to see it. Information was quickly taken to the king's son that a beautiful young lady, evidently some princess, was in waiting. His Royal Highness hastened to the door, welcomed Cinderella, and handed her out of the carriage. He then led her gracefully into the ballroom, and introduced her to his father, the king. The moment she appeared, all conversation was hushed. The violins ceased playing, and the dancing stopped short, so great was the sensation produced by the stranger's beauty. A confused murmur of admiration fluttered through the crowd, and each was fain to exclaim, "How surpassingly lovely she is!" The ladies were all busy examining her headdress and her clothes, in order to get similar ones the very next day, if indeed they could meet with stuffs of such rich patterns, and find workwomen clever enough to make them up. What a lovely creature! So fair, so beautiful! What a handsome figure! How elegantly she is dressed! Even the prince's father, old as he was, could not behold her with indifference, but wiped his eyeglass, and used it very much, and said very often to the queen that he had never seen so sweet a being. The king's son handed Cinderella to one of the most distinguished seats on the dais at the top of the hall, and begged she would allow him to hand her some refreshments. Cinderella received them with great grace. When this was over, the prince requested to have the honor of dancing with her. Cinderella smiled consent, and the delighted prince immediately led her out to the head of the dance, just about to commence. The eyes of the whole company were fixed upon the beautiful pair. The trumpet sounded, and the music struck up, and the dance commenced. But if Cinderella's beauty, elegant figure, and the splendor of her dress had before drawn the attention of the whole room, the astonishment at her dancing was still greater. Gracefulness seemed to play in all her motions. The airy lightness with which she floated along, as buoyant as thistledown, drew forth a general murmur of admiration. The hall rang with the loudest acclamations of applause, and the company, all in one voice, pronounced her the most elegant creature that had ever been seen. And this was the little girl who had passed a great part of her life in the kitchen, and had always been called a cinder wench. When the dance was ended, a magnificent feast was served up, consisting of all delicacies. So much was the young prince engaged with Cinderella that he did not eat one morsel of the supper. Cinderella drew near her sisters and frequently spoke to them, and in her goodness of heart she offered them the delicacies which she had received from the prince. But they did not know she was their sister. When Cinderella heard the clock strike 11:15, she made a low courtesy to the whole assembly and retired in haste. You see how fortune befriends the good-hearted, and even out of such unpromising material as a pumpkin and mice can make a coach and six with which to honor her worthy favorite. So Cinderella goes to the ball, but to teach her to be diligent and faithful in her engagements, her fairy godmother enjoins upon her that she return home at 12. Native beauty and grace attract the princely heart, and while the king's son pays no heed to her pretentious sisters, he is all grace and condescension to little Cinderella. Obedient to her engagement with her godmother, she returns in all the splendor and honor of the coach and six. On returning home, she found her godmother, and after thanking her for the treat she had enjoyed, she ventured to express a wish to return to the ball on the following evening, as the prince had requested her to do. She was still relating to her godmother all that had happened at court, when her two sisters knocked at the door. Cinderella went and let them in, pretending to yawn and stretch herself and rub her eyes, and saying, "How late you are!" just as if she was waked up out of a nap, though, truth to say, she had never felt less disposed to sleep in her life. "If you had been to the ball," said one of the sisters, "you would not have thought it late. There came the most beautiful princess ever seen, who loaded us with polite attentions, and gave us oranges and citrons.